This theme is very meaningful because it's a chorale, but it's also a complaint. And the fact that the tension of the suspension needs to release itself into the resolution by tension release. And then the long descent of the third down to the dominant. The second half of the theme to the relative major. Third to the C major. This is the cacciatura. And again the high F down to D. So the whole group of notes in the four quarters of the theme are dropping, like exhaling. Then difficultly going up. And again dropping. So that's why the suspension should not be resolved in a release. It should be resolved in a new tension. Going from the ascension of the tritone to the diminished fourth, which are both chromatic intervals, altered intervals, tense intervals. And the fact that it starts in an upbeat, which we don't know before it starts, means that we're suspended on the upbeat, and so we have to give a downbeat on the bass. And then the four-part string quartet writing has to be legatissimesque. I would even overstay the welcome of the thirds in the middle parts. Compared to the outer parts. Which is less legato because it has to be parlato, it has to speak, like syllables pronounced by a singer and agreed by the baritone. It's really, Mendelssohn is pure Mozart in the sense of the beauty of the inner voices as well as the meaning of the bass, and not only the melody, all of it. Not this, rather. And I would agree to have only the arrival of the dominant as the drop of the phrase in terms of the graphic. In the first variation you want to maintain this legato in the top part, but in this case you want to have staccato pizzicato in the cello double bass in octaves, cherry picking, suction cup, velcro, whichever image, because I squeeze them and I can feel in the tips of my cushion part of the fingers the edges of the other white keys around it, like I'm squeezing it tight, almost like a cat paw that tries to, yeah, but mostly from inside the key, not from above, not drop, not pom 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 pom, but so without the momentum from the drop from the top, but from lifting from the note, which allows to be even softer, precisest, but also to voice the thumb or the fifth. So the left hand in 3D, pizzicato with air. Each of these variations allows for in-depth practice of specific articulations. Of course, for musical needs, not just by themselves, but the genre of the variations allows that, because you can focus on each variation exactly how to prepare yourself. For instance, the right hand, the gesture has to be anticipated too. And I suggest a very interesting, stretchy but possible fingering for the melody 5-3. 5-3. Between A, G sharp and D, C sharp, again not diminuendo. So you climb to the Fa or to the F. And when you repeat the Do, it's a sense of term of endearment. Oh, my dear you. Only here diminish and prepare yourself to bridge through until there. With 5-4-5 and straight 2-1. Camminando, walking, not really legato, air legato not even, almost portato. I would say whisperato. If possible, from really inside the key, without the bite of the depressing key, but already within the key, halfway almost, and then just like in the second escapement under legatissimo, perhaps at this point, but I would say not really heavily overlapped, because you want clarity of this walking part. So you can hear without pedal, I didn't use the right foot yet, the legato of the melody, with stretchy, flat, and a little bit stretchy fingers, inevitably, because of the stretch, but the inner 16th notes under, like a muted viola. Violin 2 in viola, violin 1 and violin 2, violin 1, violin 2 with the pins of the bass, fifth and fourth and third, mostly fourth and fifth, and then third, second, and first for the camminando. And voiced on the thumb. Or voiced on the fifth. Both in dialogue of pizzicati and tutti frutti. 5-4-5-4-5-4-5. Sorry for singing. So you can pass the 5 under the 4. Help with the moving of the wrist to the side in order to allow that anything but that would be consecutive same fingers, which will need the pedal, which kills the staccato, the pizzicato of the left hand. Or doesn't kill, but wets it enough to disappoint us for having the three textures: legato, camminando, pizzicato. Dynamic is piano. That means sempre piano, as he writes it, constantly piano, not by waves or unexpected accents, even if there is an expression of endearment or sforzando, which would be more like a tenuto. Every variation is a garden with a gardener and a fence, and each of them you have a specific culture that you're developing in order to have a given fruit or plant or whatever you want to obtain, and you go from one to the other by exploring the different articulations. It's more like etudes rather than variations, or perhaps a combination of. So this one is based, of course, on the string quartet writing since the beginning, but this time he's still thinking of the Baroque style for his day. In Romantics era, 1840, he wants to write something austere, which is called Sérieuses, à la Bach. So he starts with a chorale, 4-part chorale, and then the second variation has those written out, what would be decorations in Baroque, or perhaps even slow notated ornaments, rolling, most likely mordents. In a Baroque-ish way, but rolling. That have to prevail. We're basically on the chorale of the 4-part writing of the theme, but with incorporated air legato, I think this time for sure. Decorated thirds, which in fact with the neighboring tones, minus it, we have the theme. So the theme is almost the same writing, but without the 6 tuplets inside in the top. Which is why it's so important not to abuse or overuse the soles of the right foot pedal, because if you ever do, there you go, it's just fog it up. No, it has to be crystal clear, tender, but precise. You have to practice those thirds with the rhythms. Also hold and poke. Muscular memory through the brain, obviously. And not softly, even relatively mezzo, not heavy, but articulated by lifting the fingers for the trigger from the knuckle. And not the tension from the arm or the wrist. But almost hurt myself. To demonstrate the solidity of the palm palm support, while the flexibility of the wrists. Might not like it, but your audience will. Well, not right away. And again, and again. That sandcastle on the beach, always rebuilt, always erased, always restarted until it holds. Naturally, if the acoustic is dry, if the piano is a little bit on the metallic side according to the hammers or whatever it is, you can always modulate by adding a little puff of pedal for color, like a little cloud, but not mist or not a fog. But not. But rather. We're going to use the same technique that we used for the variation 1 with the staccati, pizzicati, picked up, cherry-picked from the keyboard, but this time by groups. And to maintain for the octave the imprint, we're going to maintain the imprint 5-1, while we're going to extract it by lifting the wrist to liberate the forearm. We don't want to play staccato from the forearm in the octave, regardless if it's forte for the third bar. Not that. This is rebouncing. It's clear. It's like champagne bubbles. Pa-pa-pa-pum. And not elephantesque. Of course, if, and that is the purpose for the example, the tips of the fingers are like loose brushes or some kind of macaroni on the ivory, inevitably you wouldn't like that because you don't have the imprint when you rebounce with the wrist. Of course, it doesn't have to be high wrist rebouncing, just enough to maintain the wrist from being stiff. Of course, it's easy to do 3 in a row, but it's more when it comes in the middle. That's why the wrist is important, because the wrist allows you to do the marathon, not just the sprints of 3 at a time, but more. So go back slowly. We practice staccato with legato, opposite, working on the individual articulation, so even the thumb has its articulation from the knuckle and the fifth as well. Then both, like lobsters in a way, just from the fingers. The short 5 and 1, lifting to play, like ballerinas would lift their leg very high, or cancan dancers. And then you use the wrist to launch them. So they play with precise tips while with flexible stretch from the wrist. And again voiced, like seasoned to the voicing, zesty or peppery or salty. And of course in the right hand, if you just drop the fingers, it all becomes like brushes for dusting the keyboard, obviously. So I have to practice a dotted rhythm. And I would practice them legato. To observe which fingers, and for each disposition, find out if you invert and you think this is your keyboard, how the fingerlings that you have on the tips of the fingers that will touch the thumb, the 3rd, the 5, or the thumb, the 2, the 5, according to the black keys, the white keys. So for each chord, you have the 3 tips touching at the same time, also according, therefore, to the topography of the keys. All white, middle black, top black, bottom black, middle black, none. And how are you going to observe how you're going to do with the thumb? If it's like this and it's short and you have to turn the wrist and create an accent, you can take it in the left hand because you already have the A, so you can help yourself to share the burden to obtain equality. But you can practice it in under tempo with the held top or outer voices, like in staccato the bottom, possibly also double. Or the opposite. And this also in rhythm. And when it's the long series, a little bit of freedom of the forearm, perhaps a little bit of wrist to lift you. Every 4, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, I meant 2. And then the danger with the practicing in the rhythm is that it often, people are of course human, who's not me the first. So what happens is that the practice is not fun, or at least it's just more like a fragment that is being worked on. And so in order to make it precise well, you have to be aware of doing it right. Not just rhythm for rhythm with accents on the beats, like a drag. It has to be precise, light, and fun. Well, it's difficult to be fun for a practice. But you have to have it in your expectation. So don't satisfy yourself from a sloppily practiced in tempo or under tempo dotted rhythm with accents on the beat. Done it, so it's done. No, it's not necessarily right. You have to always think that you have to actively, intellectually, concentratedly teach your muscular brain, if I may say, the muscular memory to remember each of the terrain's different positions. So you memorize patterns, like middle voice. In this case, 3, 2, 3 on the same DD, and then 3, 2, 3. Sometimes you can do these variations on exercises, which is on top of the variations of Mendelssohn, but the variation on a given exercise for the obtaining of the articulation. I missed it. So you practice not, but the exact gesture, F, G, F, G, F, G, and so you do you observe your gesture, you observe your forearm, you memorize the exact elements of the cognitive motion. You memorize the cognitive motion. After repetitivity, you forget even to think, which is not the best, but it allows you to be reassured that you could play it on autopilot. Of course, there's always the little mistake in between. You practice it, and of course you get numb, mentally, not to mention fingers. So you should alternate the exercises. For the grip and for the wrist. For the grip and for the wrist. Until you hear all the notes and record yourself. play piano with little crescendo and forte. This is forte, piano, forte. The problem with the octaves in the lower register is that the composers like Mendelssohn, Schumann, Chopin, all of them, Beethoven not to mention, octaved because of the balance with the right hand, since their pianos of the day were usually without the cross strings, they were straight strings, so they were very good at compartmental, let's say, sound quality, but didn't merge well. So very often you had these balances when you played together between the two hands, mostly in disfavor of the bass, which was weak compared to what they would have liked to have in an orchestral way. So they often octaved those elements which probably on modern piano, were they alive, which is an impossible chronological statement, they might have taken them off and just done. And not. Which in fact is overwhelming on the modern piano, which paradoxically has bigger basses than the length of sound on the top, and therefore you have to artificially practice to lighten up the precision of the left hand octaves. So you can continue to follow the melodic notes of the melody, of the soprano, and not have the trombones overwhelmed by the balance of the elements. To play it less dry staccato, more tenuto, wet staccato. That's not very precise, Mr. Naoumoff. I thought I should have taken the left hand. Because some students consider it cheating if you take something in the other hand in order to create the sense or image, the illusion that you play it all evenly, because it is even, but it is often a question of changing direction of the arm that makes it uneven beyond the expectation. So if you play the last 16th note shared D, instead of, it isn't allowed to down, accent too much the G. Compared to, so you have to practice. I personally don't think it's a problem if it's well done and if it reaches its point, which is to sound even, in this case. Variation 4 is continuation of this staccato one, except this time is a two-voice invention with zesty grace notes. As he calls it, sempre staccato e legato. E leggero, of course not staccato e legato, that would be an impossible task. It's staccato e leggero, I meant. When I get excited and I get driven, as I'm now, in order to give examples, play, speak, of course, I get a bit breathless. But even if I don't talk, I could get breathless because very often in demanding variations, in this case, you would withhold your breath and go. Inevitably you breathe, you intake air, because if not you'll die. But you don't take it and exhale it as if you will do it in a more calm movement. That goes without to say. So you have to practice also the thinking, where you're going to intake, where you're going to exhale, just like a singer, a wind player, perhaps not as detailedly, but incorporated in your thinking. After all, we think of the articulation of the hands, of the pedal, of the foot. we have to think also of how we have the blood stream through our body, irrigating our brain so we can be alert. And if we withhold it, the breath, very often then we're less alert because we're like in a situation of fear, withholding. But we have to be very ahead of time thinking what's going to happen. For instance, in this variation 4, when you play this, you think this. When you play this, you think this. Then you prepare already. C sharp, I'm sorry. A bit exaggerated. I feel like I'm doing Lama's technique now. It's not necessary to exhale like that. It sounds like some kind of animal. You don't need to do that, but just be aware, not to withhold too much the breath, but also to exhale it while you play. This kind of variation has to be practiced in legato, with the departure of the two hands in canon, breathing before each departure, like second beat, first beat, again the right hand, now left hand, now right hand, now first left hand. Demonstrative in the beginning with this lifting, but in performance not. So you have all the consecutive entrances. And this is also a lot of scratching the keys to obtain the staccato leggero in this tempo. The tempo is not defined by him. He's an andante sostenuto for the theme, which is often over slowly played because it's this kind of aria antiche style of imitation of austere old music. But then variation 1 is supposed to be the same. It says un poco più animato, but it's already in sextole. It's più animato by the rhythm itself. And then più animato in 3. Variation 3. And then in 4. So it's not a competition for speed. It's more about a progression, depending on how slow you start the theme. But this is something to construct when you play it entirely. When you practice individually, of course, you practice slow, legato in rhythm, hold and poke, dotted rhythms by 3, possibly with breathing, or even first and foremost in clusters, but rhythmically. You count N1, N2, N1, N2, N1, N2, N1, N2, N2. Sounds terribly, perhaps disturbing for the neighbors, but very practical for us to manage and to teach our hands to play the patterns in rhythm. Then legato. Choosing to play the grace notes together, to be zesty and perky. You can imagine how much all of them list included were impressed by Paganini to always imitate him. In the Carnival by Schumann, spiccato on the violin when you bounce on the string with the bow very fast, and it's like so effective. Light, precise, and aerial. Then we have a series of variations that are a little bit different. Variation 5 is the kind that you will like to hear later with Brahms, the kind that has this rounded sound with colors and harmonic melodization, so to say. It almost sounds... in Brahms's concerto. Here, but it's one of those genres with the left hand in syncopation a la Schumann, off the beat, and the right hand on the beat. And so the sense of agitato is the sense of anxiety for agitation, rather not the fidgety agitation, but the soulful anxiety, and it's piano, legato, espressivo. Other than that, I don't know how many more indications he can give us to show us that he's inside, that is a turmoil. As much as this was before that in variation 3 extroverted, this is inside. Almost like seasickness of the soul. I advocate a lot practicing the chords with the straightest possible fingers from knuckle to tip in order to have which position and imprint that you memorize by the tips of the fingers. Play every note at the moment of demand, which is just when you touch the key. All speak, not half of them, or some not together, or some not at all. No holes, no Swiss cheese. And a little bit slightly voiced, perhaps in muted second viola. Therefore, the pedal off on every first bar because it's a 16th note rest. Sustains, rest, rest. If the pedal overstays, then you kill it. While the rally, well, you kill it. You smear it. Voice the top, practice the bottom staccato, the top legato to obtain the difference of touch. Open the elbow for the 6th to avoid trying to keep the elbows to the trunk and then sounding with a bitter sound. You have this kind of warm inside, soft sound. For the contrast, I would advocate the unicorda because you come from the whole variation, just for the beginning of the variation in the transition to obtain this immediate help, you obtain this contrast. And then after the third bar, let it off the unicorda. Unfortunately, it would was too loud. Of course, you can modulate that also with the finger technique. To not play too loud without the unicorda. hand in the beginning of the bar. So the chordal accompaniment has to have transparencies. And breathing. Variation 6 is the variation of prepared shiftings. That's so good because you're going to use it for every piece of chamber music to concerti for precision while quality of sound, anticipation of the gesture, and not the jumping with choreographic ballistic missile landings. Because it's lack of precision, and if it is, it's lucky, and if it's lucky, it's not even controlled for the sound. So it's not just play clean, but also how well you voice. So you have to shift before you play, you have to be on the notes before you play them, and you count so you don't play as landed. And two, and two, and two, and two, and one, and two, and three, and two, and one, and two, and three, and four, and one. And this inside you. If you shift before you've played, as I just did, you won't speak. And if you stay too long to prepare it, when your shifting is slow, you slow down your tempo. So you don't want to sacrifice nor slow down. You have to anticipate in order to be ready. I know it looks a bit robotic in terms of the gesture itself. But if you keep the conductor in your inner ear organizing the phrasing, it's not robotic in the music, it's just clear, precise, and shaped. Each chord can be either blunt, because it's not forbidden, or voiced. I know one can over voice. Can one? Who can the more, can the least? So you have to be able to always prepare in advance. Variation 6 is the arpeggio plus the chords. No, it's not cheated as many people might say, because in the notation, which is only notation, it's written in one hand. So you can practice arpeggio for progression in your technique, because you don't pass the thumb under like in a scale. You hear it, you pass the thumb above and not under the hand. Or you do with shared hands. In practice the combination of the two thumbs, so that if you do it in two hands, it doesn't sound like in two hands. It fits the purpose. But most importantly, what it helps is to focus with one hand towards the note that matters the most, the high note. So, hopefully not miss like that. No, like this. If you want to be facetious and a little bit overdone. But I don't believe it myself, because it's ugly. On top of it, vulgar, not to mention uncalled for, because there's no sforzando. It's just a drive of this confuoco. After all, it's fire is here, right? It doesn't say with a match. A generous high note, a scream, a call, a bird. Not, yeah, would be too dry. Both alternatively, you can do a little bit of the menomos, so to allow for each down wrist, up wrist, according to the, not too much, to the gesture, since the gesture is not parallel but alternative, is not, nor, is probably the pivotal variation because it opens the door for variation 8, which variation 8 is the kind that is double with 9, since it's exactly the same, but one is just for the right hand alone, etude of sorts, and one is for the two hands, for instance. Sort of a flight of the bumblebee before composed by Rimsky-Korsakov, or minimalist music before Adams. Everything is basically on three notes, with a fourth sound on the second repeated note. Re mi fa fa, re mi fa fa, re mi fa fa. And the launching thirds from the launcher of the thumb, which we'll practice by holding the thumb and launching the thirds. Preceding variation where we saw pizzicato, very light. How do you repeat quickly the note? It also uses a little bit of a wrist jolt in slow motion on the second of the two. And the danger is to lift the wrist towards it, and then you have no more leverage. But if you stay low wrist, and you only lift on the second, which repeats inside the key, fully up, if it replays too early, the jolt is too harsh, and therefore the finger repeats before the key had time to lift enough to repeat. So you have to measure, especially when it's a black key, because you have to climb on it most like an alpinist. I use it a little bit with the escape of the wings. Oh, that's a deformation of my talk, of the elbows. So of course you practice each of these variations individually to find the exact gesture that allows to obtain what is necessary in a dynamic articulation and mood. But of course you have to practice also the connections, how you arrive into it, and memorize immediately the disposition you need to be ready for. So you can connect the variations after you practice them individually and muscle memorize them. You fine-tune it so that you know exactly at which point you go too fast and you won't repeat. You don't really always know, but you hope. It's really empirical, it's not scientific. I mean, it is partly because you find the gesture that allow you not to get tense, but that doesn't mean that, well, anyway. It has to be done by practicing, and the practicing brings you to understand better your own response to it from the keyboard of the very industry of playing. That's the fact of playing the piano, not another word than that, in the sense of playfulness. The cognitive aspect of it, in both hands the same thing. Variation 9 is in fact variation on variation 8. Of course, this time the thumb is the one to play this fourth sound, the second repeated note. Fa, sol, la, fa, la, fa, re, si. And if you change the finger to 1 with the black key, you have to be very, well, it depends on the size of the thumb. Aware which part of the thumb touches what, so don't slide. Because of course the black key is thinner. alternates the dynamics as if to make you practice it in an exercise, which is a piece. Repeated note piano, repeated piano and forte, and totally piano, and forte completely. Variation 10, the fugato alla Bach, legato, and relatively flat musically in terms of expression or effects, just lake mirror surface. Just legato, but not over. It's almost like a break for the muscles to prepare for the next two variations, 11 and 12. The 11 is the invitation. Oops. Invitation to the wrong note. That was unfortunate. To variation 12. I'd rather stay in D minor, Mr. Naoumoff. I know it's awkward to talk to oneself in the third person. Good leftovers of my childhood when I used to play it. And I love teaching it. And the fact is that this is really the one for releasing the tension of the wrist with precision. Octaves and thirds alternate, like Chopin etudes would be stretch and retract for the flexibility of the hand. To stay on the ostinato of D with a sforzando on the first note. It's very different from the one we had, variation 8, where the accent was in the second upbeat. Here is a downbeat. And not like a da. Acoustically being very dry in this room, I indulge in a little bit of pedal to give it a roundness, which most of natural acoustics of concert halls would do without pedal. To maintain the clarity of the repeated note and practice it in legato with single note in double rhythm, especially when the left hand kicks on the right hand's notes. Leads to the variation 13, which is a combination of staccatissimo in the right hand and this kind of scratch, but phrased with a little bit of a design, with the escaped and with the passing tones and the appoggiaturas and the Neapolitan 6 and all the effects, while the melody is in the middle voice, legato, and a pizzicato just for the single note in the bottom. I advocate zero pedal in order to hear the differences of articulation, the length of sound of the theme. The not staccato, in fact, sort of wet pizzicato with vibrato. But because the real staccato, dry one, is in the right hand, assai marcato, as he writes, sempre. I would even suggest that it's possible possible to play variation 13 slightly under the tempo after the enormous amount of wind that is generated before, in order to hear the separations and not risk to play too fast, to play almost together, connected. It ought not to be, not even air legato, it should be staccato, that means chopped, staccare. Practice it legato with one suggestion is that the palm supports the staccato. The arch of the knuckles, and the fingers just drop and scratch and retract under the hand. And you practice it legato. For individual articulation, from above, down, and then retracted. Noted rhythm. Of course, hold and poke. And then to connect it with the wrist and the forearm. Breathing, opening if needed. Almost sound like a cooking show where I give the ingredients and the cooking and then it should play. But of course, since we are building sand castles on the beach, it doesn't always go straight line. You have to have the pianistic courage that most people on stage don't think pianists have. They just think they play. That should be the good illusion. But unfortunately, the more you do, the least you can, and the more you start and you try again until you finally could. So before the final series of variations, which will be the firework of the piece, you have this final break, which is variation 4, the theme in chorale in major, again with octaves in the left hand for the balance, in disfavor in those days, I think, and in overfavor in this day. So you have to balance this. And variation 15, as soft, as flat as possible in terms of dynamics. Poco generando in the agitation. And do the legato. With fingerings like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5. And then try to legato with least possible pedal, but not forbidden, since it doesn't smear much. So 16 and 17 are the ones that are the most organized for the gestural alternation of the two hands. In this case, the gallop of, so to say, of the horses, with the two hands in alternation, starting with the left and the right hand following and playing the escaped. And the variation 17. Guess what? Is the left hand playing after the right hand? The tense. The right hand was originally playing it after the left hand initiated it in variation 16. A bit like in this variation, it's a question of rhythmic alternation of the two hands practiced, which is not as difficult as it looks, as a matter of fact, when it's done properly, as everything. What appears in the most in these variations sérieuses is the design to make the pianist practice in order to play them with gusto, but of course with discipline, and the discipline of practicing for each section. So you cannot hide behind any unplayed note because you'll hear it. Of course you can cover it, but that would be too obvious too by the pedal. Pedal is a color, not as a glue or an insurance. It's none of that. The precision of the preparation before you play the note, the disposition. And this, of course, reaches its climax at the dominant pedal, played as a tremolo in an orchestral timpani. And the final firework is a very Hungarian style, gypsy style rather than Hungarian style, syncopated, presto, very lively, spirited. Like the G major 31-3 Beethoven. Catch me if you can. And here is. But in the presto tempo, it almost sounds like together, but slightly not. In the slow tempo. But you don't want to practice too slow because you really want to practice by perhaps capsules of fragments. The combination of the two hands in alternate synchronization in order to organize each wrist, each precision of the finger. Different elements which we worked on the different variations before, with the precision of the wrist, the lifting, the descending. Diminished seventh for all good purposes of delaying. A purpose in non-perfect cadence to sound serious, churchish, so to say. It could have been almost a play girl, which it is originally. 4-1, but going with passing tones. Since he already had the fireworks just before and finishes with this seriousness of the serious variation. So I would say perhaps austere for some, most likely, compared to an Hungarian Rhapsody by Liszt or perhaps the Polonaise by Chopin. In contrast, something more neo-Baroque for an early Romantic era composer. But mostly amazing feast for the fingers, various articulations. It's sort of probably more toccata in the variety and diversity of touches, rather than in the sense of toccare, touch. In the variety of touches in serving each of these variations as etudes for layered, voice-led, articulated and independent fingers. That would be a good hope, so that this way, in fact, you inject some of these elements of playing the piano in other pieces way beyond Mendelssohn, which of course will occur in any pianist's practicing. So this way you have a beautiful music as an etude, but also as etude in a beautiful music. So it's really a gracious gift of Mendelssohn for us. Pianists, piano teachers, and just musicians, of course. Inspiring. Thank you.